Greetings and good morning. Day number 2 here in Missouri. If you haven't caught day 1, go back, make sure you watch that video because everything strategically is going to make sense, a lot easier. You're going to understand our plan as to what we're getting done here on the farm today. As far as yesterday goes, we got some corn in. We got a couple trail cameras up. Going back to that corn, we did plant that strategically for screening based off of predominant winds. Got some other little chores done today. We're going to try and chip away at some other more important, maybe not more important, but other important things. Try and get our forage beans in, plant those strategically. We're going to show you as to why we're doing what we're doing here. Get some more trail cameras out. Get some supplemental feed out. That's super important to me. Honestly, it's probably more important than ever putting out mineral. Maybe we can get more into the science of the mineral and stuff like that a little bit later on in this video and just speak strictly in scientific terms as to what works and what doesn't. It's not personal opinion or anything like that, but we got a lot to do today. We got another 6 acres of beans going in, got some trail cameras to go up, and we got the Big & J high protein feed to get out for these deer, and so I'm excited. A lot of work to come though. Oh, and we're putting up an electric fence. You guys are going to be interested and want to see how I do this, especially across 6 acres. So let's get to work. Keep in mind, not putting much in, so. Never planted turnips and radishes this early. We get out of it. He comes back a little bit later with his dog. All right, guys, so we got out a bunch of Big & J. We really focus on putting out a lot more feed than mineral. So here's the thing about mineral. Mineral definitely helps with antler development, especially in a closed environment. That's what the science shows us. But we can't dictate what those deer necessarily eat every single day in an open environment, which is what we're all hunting in. So another thing I like to do to supplement the herd during growing season is get out supplemental feed, something high in protein, high in fat. It's more important to me to have a high protein, high fat food source. There are times of the year in which deer can process carbohydrates, but as we get into that later portion of the year, they can't necessarily process those carbohydrates nearly as easy. They can even die of something called rumen acidosis if they gorge themselves to death. After that, metabolism slows down. So I always try to keep my food sources and my feed, my supplemental feeding program, high in protein and high in fat. The antlers are made, in majority of protein. And so getting down a high protein food source that can directly correlate to body growth and antler growth is definitely a no-brainer during the growing season. I also like doing it late season and in the off season, but right now is a great time to get a lot of that supplemental feed down. When it comes to supplemental feeding, there's 2 ways we can go about doing this. There's one, is the gaining of the inventory, maybe getting a little bit of mineral, a little bit of supplemental feed, but if you truly want to make a considerable difference as far as antler production goes, body weight, and all those good things, the things that we sadly, or maybe not so sadly, but care about. We want to see big recs, we want to see big deer. That's when you start feeding in bulk, start feeding in greater amounts. That's going to make more of an impact. The more consistently that there's a consistent amount of quality food out here, the better the impact or the greater the impact that it's going to make on your deer herd, ultimately making the hunting a hell of a lot more enjoyable in the long run. Depending on the product that you use, in this case we are using Big & J, which is super attractive. I mean, that's literally in the name, and it's attractant, and I wouldn't say this if it wasn't true. We get something like this Big & J down, and these deer are in here within sometimes even minutes of when we leave. Most time within a couple hours. But it's super important when you're using a supplemental feed that it's something that is super attractive to the deer and they enjoy using. There are other brands that I will not mention that put weather-resistant coatings on some of their feed, and the deer don't tend to hit those nearly as hard. So Big & J is what's worked for me. and the deer seem to hit it within a matter of minutes and, you know, at most a couple hours. So in states in which supplemental feed is legal, guys, I like to put it out semi-strategically. One, I need to make sure I can get to it and refill it up throughout those summer months and even into the off season without bothering the deer herd too much. So we're kind of on the fringes of the property right now. But more importantly, if we think about our correlation with westerly winds and how this property lays out, we know the bedding area is in the back of the property. We know this is a good place where they might stop on their way out to the destination food source. And so ultimately we're just creating that pattern all throughout this summertime so that these deer become patterned, get used to working out this way, where our tree stand locations are waiting for them on the destination food source. As far as supplemental feeding goes, I generally like to put about one supplemental feeding site per 40 acres, maybe upwards to 80 acres. It depends on your given situation. That's when you need to look at it as a herd manager or a land manager and say, what is my deer density like? How many deer do I have on the property? Do we have 20 or 30 deer spending time on the property at a given time? Do we have 1 or 2? You know, I like to stick between that 40 and 80 acre range, especially even with your mineral sites, every 40 to 80 acres. But it really depends on your given farm. You have to look at those, I guess, those deer analytics, see what things, what's taking place on your property, what the deer numbers are, and that will ultimately dictate how many supplemental food sources and even mineral sites you should have on a given property. It might be, I don't think it's going to flow out how I want it to. All right, guys, so we got one of my Exodus rivals set up here. Ended up running an external antenna, which is super useful in places where you don't get great service. If you get one bar, you get about 2 or 3 more by adding one of these. And I'm also running a solar panel. So it's a cumbersome setup, but on private land where you're looking to have a bulletproof setup where you don't have to come back to, this is the ultimate setup. I'm gonna leave this all year. It's gonna run a solar panel for years. So you guys can go to Exodus Outdoor Gear and find these. Next there's a promo code WLM10 you can use to get money off of a lot of your cell cams and stuff like that. So this is the new rival, but we put this trail camera on a trail on a big fence crossing, going across this trail, this other main driving trail. And so in the summertime, it's a combination of maybe scrapes, intersecting trails, and food sources for me, along with mineral and supplemental feeding. But so the reason I ended up choosing this trail over any other trail across the property, there are other fence crossings, but the nice thing about this is it's kind of, you know, there's this trail that runs what I'll call north and south, but there's a lot of east and west movement that passes through this general area moving up to our destination food source. So yeah, it's on one given trail, but it's also in an area in which we might catch a lot of cross movement. It's kind of an intersecting area, which is where I like to put a lot of my trail cameras, especially when just putting them on trails. I like to have them in intersections. There's a better opportunity for those deer to cross in front of those cameras in that given case. This is one of a couple more we got to get today, but it's going to be a bunch of different locations, from trails to scrapes to mineral and everything else. So on to the next project. right guys, so I don't know if you can see it behind me or not, but we're getting some soybeans right now. We specifically designed this food plot so there'd be soybeans in specific locations and corn, compartmentalizing those soybeans so that those deer felt safe in coming out in daylight hours, back in some of these coves and things like that. So what we did is we planted a forage bean, something that's going to withstand browse pressure a bit better. It's going to produce way more leaves, which is an early season food source, and way more pods, which is a great late season food source. Soybeans in general are one of the most attractive plants when it comes to feeding whitetails. If you don't fence it off, if you don't use products like Milorganite or anything like that to keep these deer off of it, they will browse it down to nothing. So the point of using a forage bean is to ultimately create way more forage per acre. Sometimes, depending on the bean, up to 3 times the amount of if you were to plant an agriculture bean. They're not the same thing. A lot of these forage beans have been known to grow up to chest height, even all the way up to 84 inches, and they've been genetically modified to create vines, 3 times the leaves, 5 times the leaves, 7 times the leaves. And you can use different maturity rate beans also, depending on if you want it to be more of an early season bean plot and it'll produce more leaves, or more pods for late in the year. Forage beans, whether you're doing a half acre, 3 acres or 10 acres, is always the option for me. And if you are using, these soybeans, forage soybeans in these smaller areas, make sure you're using some sort of maybe fencing or some precaution to keep these deer off them. Milorganite, something, but always go with the forage bean. We have a lot of grain here. Maybe we'll mix in some green later in the season, but we ended up planting those Game Changer 2.0 Stratton seed beans at about 50 pounds per acre, on the lower side of what I could have done, but since we are fencing it, I'm not too worried about the browse pressure. We did not overseed. We also kept it with 15-inch rows. Sometimes I'll do 30-inch rows if I wanted to broadcast some greens in between later in the summer. So in order to keep these deer off of this field, we are planning to kind of run an electric fence, a double strand fence, so that it messes with their depth perception. The thing about whitetails that a lot of people don't realize is their eyes are on the side of their head, ours are on the front of our head, on the front of our head, or the front of our face. We can make sense of depth perception. They have troubles with it, so that double layered fence is really gonna help keep those deer out, at least initially, hopefully keep them out for a couple months, but ideally until season. We're gonna strategically take this fence down at a certain time. So we could wait all the way up until season, but what I would like to do is I would like to get those deer feel safe in that food plot about a month prior. I want to give them a month to get used to consistently coming out to that food plot and strategically feed on a lot of those leaves, which is, partially the reason why you pick a forage bean. It'll create maybe up to 3 times the amount of leaves, but also 3-4 times the amount of pods depending on the forage bean. So we wanted to come in, finish off, those last couple phases of the antler growth, antler development phase, come on in, finish up those soybeans while they still have the green leaves, and then about 6 weeks later than your general agriculture bean, these beans will start to drop their leaves, and then the grain becomes much more attractive. So when it comes to fencing, I like to take that fence down about 4 weeks, give or take, before season.
Up that same line the whole way.
Oh! Well guys, as you can see, we have one of our biggest projects completed. We did a lot this week, a lot. And it's really hard to see the fruits of your labor. It's hard to see the progress or the final product. This is one of those projects you can do that. And this is honestly probably one of the most important things that we could have done. So we did a double layer fencing here. Sometimes guys run a double strand on the inside for the visual trick that it pulls on the deer. I don't think that's always necessary, so we didn't do that in this case. But anyway, we ran about 0.7 miles of fence. just in one strand. So we got in between 1 and 2 miles of fence out here, and ultimately what that's going to do is it's going to keep the deer out until that strategic time in which we want to open this fence up. And the nice thing about that is if we keep the deer out of it during the summer months, let them feed on the agriculture fields in the surrounding areas, now we have food early season. Now we got food mid-season, now we got food late season, now we're picking up sheds, now we're picking up big bucks. Simple as that. So we did a lot of cool stuff. From planting the corn strategically and doing this all in a certain design and getting our trail cameras out and doing all this stuff, we got a lot of work done. And notice I said we, I did not do this alone. I had good friends. People are gonna be working with us in the future. We got some videos with some announcements as far as that stuff goes. It was a good week and I can't wait for fall. Cut!
So what did we just finish up here?
A fence.
Nice.
Yeah.
No. How big's the deer gonna be that you kill inside that fence when you take it down?
Probably a 10-pointer, but like that. Brad Pitt. I'm a blonde guy. Yeah, I'm a blonde guy for sure.